we are very happy and very fortunate to follow India in the presidency, the Indian presidency, and that set the base for a very important period. For 4 years in a row, we'll have maybe the most active countries, developing countries, important ones in the G20.
And welcome to the Raisina Ideas Pod. And we are privileged here to have with us the Foreign Minister of Brazil. And thank you, sir, for coming and taking the time to speak to us at the Raisina Dialogue and for spending time with us at the Raisina Ideas Pod. And of course, you had come here for the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting, which occurred at the same time. And Brazil will be the next host and president of the G20 after India, which is currently president. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about what plans, if any, you are formulating for your presidency, and whether you believe there will be any major overlap between the issues that have been raised in the course of India's presidency and what you will want to bring up in 2024?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me for this interview. You're right, I came for the G20 ministerial meeting, and I was very kindly invited to take part in the Raisina Dialogue, it was a very good chance. I didn't want to miss it, and I was very well impressed by the quality of the panels and the discussions and the occasion that I had here to meet different people from government, private sector, former heads of states, and so many people. The discussion is very rich. As to our next presidency of G20, we are very happy and very fortunate to follow India in the presidency because we had a very good presidency, Indian presidency, and that set the base for a very important period, because if you count the previous presidency with Indonesia, now India, and the present Troika, three big important developing countries with a strong presence abroad in the international scene, and the following presidency will be South Africa. So for 4 years in a row, we'll have maybe the most active countries, developing countries, important ones in the G20 at the presidency. And we can leave an important imprint in this mechanism because we'll take advantage of the previous presidency. And we will take a lot of the experience of the Indian presidency and the ideas that were proposed. We'll take it during our period too. We are still choosing let's say the mainstream or the motto and of the Brazilian presidency, but we will focus, no doubt, in economic development and also environment and climate change, and social aspects too, because at the end of the day, everything is the same, because you cannot have economic development, if you do not have democracy, stability. You cannot have stability if you have climate disasters. So we have to have a comprehensive look at all the issues, and we hope to be able to deliver a good program and good proposals too.
Thank you, Minister. As you pointed out, many of these issues are common issues that we all face. But in some sense, for example, on climate, there are different views that can be taken by many countries in the emerging world, in the developing world, and by the richer countries that have traditionally dominated some of the decision-making on this subject. As you've also pointed out, we have 4 successive developing countries taking over the G20. But more broadly, in the multilateral system, what are the ways you think that after the pandemic and the invasion and the sanctions and the effect the sanctions have had on food and fuel supplies, what are the ways in which the concerns of countries and citizens in the developing world can be made more audible in global multilateralism?
Well, you said it, the impact of the pandemic, of the war that's going on in Europe, and the financial effects, it affects all countries. And of course, the developing countries or the least developed countries are the more vulnerable. So we need a forum like the G20 to be able to bring all these themes to discussion. Of course, you can say, well, we have other fora, but in other fora you have a different kind of governance. Of course, we have UNFCCC, the Climate Change Convention, which is very important and has a very important role. We are very active. But here you can more freely discuss and make suggestions.
And you can move beyond maybe some of the rigid positions we have taken in the formal negotiations in many of the other. You can come up with new ideas in the G20 that you can't under many of the others. Let me sort of shift. We have a few minutes left. Let me shift to another couple of ideas. One of the things that is going to be talked about in the G20 going forward, and as a product for example, the Ukraine war, was the resilience of supply chains. And we saw food and fuel, as we just mentioned, did not do too well as a consequence of the invasion. We also worry in India and many other countries about semiconductors going forward, and, for example, about rare earths. And we recognize that there are many countries, ours among them, that may in the future want to enter the rare earth supply chain, both as producers and as processors and as consumers. Should we be thinking about the rare earth supply chain and creating resilience and political stability around that in a way that maybe we did not in time for many of these other supply chains that have broken?
Yes, of course, it's fundamental. We do have to think about it. Those are strategic reserves that are necessary for development. We have to think about it and we have to discuss that. It's fundamental. It's a top priority for all governments.
But how do we, I think one of the questions that we have in India is how do we keep it away from great power rivalries and ensure that we have a certain control over supply chains and over the benefits of this production and the benefits of its processing, which maybe did not happen with some other minerals, with fuel and so on?
Yes, you're right, but we have to raise our voices and make it known that we have our own needs. And it's not only for rare earths, but we are big importers of many other, although we have a huge mineral province in Brazil, there are some we do not have enough and we have to import. So each country has its own needs and each country has to look after its national interests. We cannot just cross our arms and have a kind of passive attitude. We have to try to change in many aspects the global governance, including in multilateral organizations such as the UN or World Trade Organization and so on. And we need space of discussion to be able to set up new frameworks and new possibilities.
I'm glad to see that you believe that the G20 is one of the, optimistically, it may be the location for some of these discussions. For example, working out how the World Bank could operate better or how other multilateral institutions could operate better. Finally, I would like to ask you a question that many people have asked online and we in India are very concerned about, which is the defense of democracy and democratic processes. The defense of those processes, not just against physical intimidation that has happened in many large democracies across the world, but also against the subverting of social media and the spread of misinformation and disinformation. Brazil and India are two of the largest democracies in the emerging world, is there anything that you feel we should be learning from each other on how to protect our democratic processes?
No doubt, I think it's important to exchange experiences. We suffered that recently. We had in the month of October general elections to elect presidents and governors and Congress and so on. And we saw at home the impact of all the manipulations of the media and the war of fake news. And we are absolutely convinced that there must be some kind of regulation and international regulation, very strict. It's not, we are not, and I am not proposing censorship of information. We think that the platforms have to be responsible for what they send and they distribute, because there are things that are obvious.
You can't have one guy maybe replying to somebody and saying that, okay, I'll look into it.
Yeah, no, of course, you have to be accountable for what you spread.
Yeah.
And with the speeds of communication these days, you reach millions or billions in few hours, and the results are horrible because you keep on bombarding people with fake news, with bad information, and distorting the look that people have at different events and different issues. So you
and creating divisions that
of course,
then can perpetuate over time.
Yes, of course, and then you control and direct people to one side or to the other side. We believe that information has to be free and open to all, but also accountable, and people have to be accountable for what they distribute.
Thank you very much, Minister. And thank you for taking the time to come to us. And we really look forward to seeing you once again at Raisina and to your presidency of the G20.